In the 1950s, farmhouse mothers made 30 suppers that did more than feed a family. Their kitchens didn't just cook meals. They created the suppers seniors living alone need right now. Warm and real food that doesn't require fancy ingredients. Heavy skillet and wood stove. That was her kitchen. But those kitchens aren't around anymore. The skillets are packed away. The women who cooked without recipes are leaving us. Today we're going back to find those 30 suppers. Let's see which one you remember. Chicken and noodles ruled every Midwest and Amish farmhouse table from the 1930s through the 1960s. One whole chicken simmered in a big pot of water with salt, pepper, celery, and onion until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken is pulled from the broth and shredded by hand. The rich broth strained and was brought back to a boil. Thick egg noodles, homemade if there was time, store-bought if there wasn't, dropped into the bubbling broth. The noodles cooked until tender and the broth thickened into gravy. The shredded chicken stirred back in. The whole pot ladled over mashed potatoes or served in bowls with bread on the side. Chicken and noodles tasted rich, comforting, and filled bellies after long days of farm work. Kids scraped their bowls clean. Adults ate seconds. Mothers made it every Sunday without ever looking at a recipe because their mothers taught them exactly how it should taste. Chicken pie became the Sunday supper every farmhouse family looked forward to after church. Not pot pie with vegetables, just chicken, gravy, and crust. One whole chicken stewed until tender in salted water. The meat pulled from the bones and cut into chunks. The broth, thickened with a flour and water paste, stirred in slowly until it turned into rich gravy. The chicken pieces stirred into the gravy. The mixture poured into a deep baking dish. Pie crust rolled thin and laid over the top. The edges crimped with a fork. Slits cut in the crust to let steam escape. The pie baked at 375 degrees until the crust turned golden brown and the gravy bubbled through the slits. Chicken pie served hot with a spoon. The flaky crust broke apart. The gravy soaked into everything. Kids fought over the crispy crust pieces. Adults praised the tender chicken. Mothers made it by memory every single time. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Beef and noodles became the Amish farmhouse supper that stretched 1 pound of beef into a meal for 8 people. Stew beef cut into small chunks and browned in a hot skillet with a little oil. Water added to cover the meat. Salt and pepper sprinkled over everything. The pot covered and simmered on low heat for 2 hours until the beef turned fork tender. More water added if needed. The broth tasted rich and beefy. Thick egg noodles dropped into the simmering beef and broth. The noodles cooked until tender, and the broth thickened into gravy that coated every noodle. Beef and noodles ladled over mashed potatoes or served in bowls with buttered bread. The dish tasted hearty and filling. Kids loved the thick gravy. Adults loved the tender beef. Farmhouse mothers made it when they needed to feed a crowd without spending much money. Nobody ever needed a recipe. Before we move, Johnny Marzetti became the Midwest church supper casserole that fed entire congregations from one pan. Ground beef browned in a skillet with chopped onions until the meat turned gray and the onions softened. Salt and pepper added. A can of tomato soup or tomato sauce stirred in. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender and drained. The cooked macaroni mixed with the beef and tomato mixture in a big bowl. The whole thing poured into a greased casserole dish. Shredded cheddar cheese sprinkled thick over the top. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until the cheese melted and turned bubbly and golden. Johnny Marzetti served hot from the pan with a big spoon. Kids loved the cheesy top. Adults loved the simple comfort. The dish appeared at church potlucks, family reunions, and weeknight suppers when mothers needed something fast that everyone would eat. Nobody in the Midwest needed a written recipe for Johnny Marzetti. Chicken and drop dumplings became the farmhouse supper that turned leftover chicken into something special. One whole chicken or chicken pieces simmered in salted water with celery and onion until the meat fell tender. The chicken pulled from the broth and shredded. The broth strained and brought back to a rolling boil. Dumpling batter mixed quickly. Flour, baking powder, salt, milk, and a spoonful of shortening stirred just until combined. Spoonfuls of batter dropped into the boiling broth. The pot covered tight. The dumplings steamed for 15 minutes without lifting the lid. The shredded chicken stirred back into the pot. Chicken and drop dumplings ladled into bowls. The dumplings tasted fluffy and soft. The broth tasted rich and chickeny. Kids ate the dumplings first. Adults ate everything together. Mothers made it on cold nights when the family needed something warm and filling. The recipe lived in their heads, not on paper. 5 farmhouse suppers down. Every one made without a recipe card or cookbook. Just chicken, beef, noodles, and gravy simmered on farmhouse stoves that fed families after long days in the fields. Simple ingredients turned into meals that kept everyone fed and happy. 25 more suppers coming up. Salmon patties became the Friday supper or Depression-era meal that turned a can of salmon into crispy, golden patties. 1 can of pink salmon drained and dumped into a bowl. Bones and skin picked out if anyone cared, left in if they didn't. An egg cracked into the salmon. Saltine crackers crushed into crumbs and stirred in until the mixture held together. Salt and pepper added. Hands formed the mixture into flat patties about the size of a biscuit. A skillet heated with oil or bacon grease. The patties fried on medium heat until golden brown and crispy on both sides. Salmon patties served hot with mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread. Kids ate them with ketchup. Adults ate them plain. The patties tasted crispy outside and soft inside. Mothers made salmon patties when money was tight because canned salmon cost less than fresh meat. Nobody needed a recipe. Chicken and gravy over biscuits became the farmhouse supper that turned leftover chicken into something everyone begged for. Leftover chicken, or a fresh chicken, stewed until tender in salted water. The meat pulled from the bones and cut into chunks. A little flour stirred into cold milk until smooth. The flour mixture poured into the hot chicken broth and stirred constantly until the gravy thickened. The chicken pieces stirred back into the gravy. Salt and pepper added to taste. Biscuits made from scratch or bought from the store split open and placed on plates. The hot chicken and gravy ladled over the biscuits. The gravy soaked into the fluffy biscuits. Kids ate it with a fork. Adults ate it with a spoon to get every drop of gravy. Mothers made it on Sunday nights when nobody wanted to cook a big meal, but everyone was still hungry. Tuna noodle casserole became the 1950s farmhouse staple that turned pantry ingredients into a complete meal. Egg noodles boiled in salted water until tender and drained. 1 or 2 cans of tuna drained and flaked with a fork. A can of cream of mushroom soup dumped into a big bowl. A little milk stirred into the soup to thin it out. The cooked noodles, tuna, and a handful of frozen peas mixed with the soup. The whole thing poured into a greased casserole dish. Crushed potato chips or breadcrumbs sprinkled over the top for crunch. The casserole baked at 350 degrees for 30 minutes until bubbly and golden. Tuna noodle casserole served hot from the pan. Kids loved the crunchy topping. Adults loved the creamy filling. Mothers made it when they needed something fast that used ingredients they already had in the pantry. Nobody needed to write it down. Haystack supper became the Mennonite and Amish farmhouse meal that let everyone build their own plate. Ground beef browned in a skillet with salt and pepper. A pot of white rice cooked until tender and fluffy. Lettuce shredded into thin strips. Tomatoes diced into small chunks. Cheddar cheese shredded into a bowl. Sour cream spooned into a dish. Salsa or taco sauce poured into another bowl. Tortilla chips or crackers crushed and put in a basket. Everything set out on the table in separate bowls. Each person built their own haystack, rice on the bottom, then beef, then lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, sour cream, salsa, and crushed chips piled high like a haystack. Haystack supper tasted fresh, crunchy, and customizable. Kids loved building their own plates. Adults loved that everyone got exactly what they wanted. Mothers loved that it was fast, simple, and nobody complained about what was served. Vegetable beef soup became the farmhouse supper that used every vegetable from the summer garden and simmered all day on the back of the stove. Beef soup bones or stew meat browned in a big pot. Water added to cover the meat. The pot simmered for hours until the beef turned tender. Potatoes, carrots, onions, celery, tomatoes, green beans, and corn cut fresh from the garden and added to the pot. Salt and pepper added to taste. The soup simmered until the vegetables softened and the broth turned rich and beefy. Vegetable beef soup ladled into bowls and served with cornbread or crackers. The soup tasted hearty and filling. Kids picked out their favorite vegetables. Adults ate everything together. Mothers made it in late summer when the garden overflowed and they needed to use up vegetables before frost. Nobody needed a recipe because every pot tasted different depending on what the garden gave. 10 farmhouse suppers that fed families without cookbooks or recipe cards. Chicken and noodles, beef and gravy, salmon from a can turned into crispy patties. Every meal made by memory and muscle, passed down from mothers to daughters. 20 more suppers are coming up next. Thresher's stew fed entire harvest crews across the Midwest from the 1920s through the 1950s. 2 pounds of beef chuck cut into chunks. The meat browned in a heavy pot with a little lard. Onions chopped and tossed in, potatoes peeled and quartered, carrots sliced thick, celery chopped. All the vegetables dropped into the pot with the beef. Water poured over everything until covered. Salt and pepper added. The pot brought to a boil, then turned down to simmer for 3 hours. The beef turned tender. The vegetables softened. The broth thickened into rich gravy. Flour stirred into cold water and whisked into the stew to make it even thicker. Bay leaves dropped in for extra flavor. The stew ladled into big bowls and served with thick slices of bread. Thresher's stew tasted hearty, filling, and stuck to the ribs. It kept farmhands working through long harvest days. The beef melted in your mouth. The vegetables soaked up all the beefy flavor. The gravy thick enough to coat a spoon. Kids ate bowls full after school. Adults came back for seconds and thirds. Mothers made it in the morning and let it simmer all day so supper was ready when the men came in from the fields. No recipe needed. No measuring cups. Every farm mother knew how to throw meat, vegetables, and water into a pot and make magic that fed a dozen people without breaking the budget. Chicken and drop dumplings warmed every farmhouse kitchen from the 1930s through the 1960s. One whole chicken simmered in a big pot with water, salt, pepper, celery, and onion until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken pulled from the broth and shredded by hand. The broth strained and brought back to a rolling boil. Flour, baking powder, salt, and a little butter mixed in a bowl. Milk stirred in until a thick batter formed. Spoonfuls of batter dropped into the bubbling broth. The pot covered and the dumplings steamed for 15 minutes without lifting the lid. The dumplings puffed up light and fluffy. The shredded chicken stirred back into the pot. The whole thing ladled into deep bowls. Chicken and drop dumplings tasted rich, comforting, and filled empty stomachs fast. The dumplings soaked up the broth and melted in your mouth, the chicken tender and flavorful, the broth thick and savory. Kids fought over the biggest dumplings. Adults ate until their bowls were scraped clean. Mothers made it on cold nights when the family needed something warm and filling. No measuring, no recipe card, no fuss. Just flour, broth, and chicken turned into supper that nobody forgot. Every grandmother made her dumplings a little different, but every bowl tasted like home and love and hard work paying off at the end of a long day. Beef hash showed up on farmhouse tables across America from the 1920s through the 1950s. Leftover pot roast or Sunday beef chopped into small pieces. Potatoes boiled until tender, then diced. Onions chopped fine. A big cast-iron skillet heated on the stove with a spoonful of lard or bacon grease. The onions tossed in first and cooked until soft and golden. The diced potatoes added next and fried until golden and crispy on the edges. The chopped beef stirred in, salt and pepper sprinkled over everything. The whole mixture pressed down flat in the skillet and left alone to form a crispy brown crust on the bottom. A spatula slipped under, and the hash flipped in sections. The other side fried until crispy and browned. Beef hash served hot with fried eggs on top, or a side of buttered toast. The hash tasted savory, crispy, and satisfying. The potatoes crunchy on the outside and soft inside. The beef rich and flavorful. The crispy crust the best part. Kids ate it for breakfast or supper without complaining. Adults made it stretch leftovers into another full meal. Mothers made it without thinking, because their mothers taught them how to turn scraps into something delicious. Salmon loaf appeared on Depression-era tables from the 1930s through the 1950s when fresh fish cost too much. 1 can of pink salmon drained and dumped into a mixing bowl, the bones mashed with a fork because calcium mattered and nothing went to waste. Breadcrumbs or crushed crackers stirred in, 2 eggs beaten and poured over, a little milk added, chopped onion and celery mixed through, salt and pepper sprinkled in, a squeeze of lemon juice if there was one. Everything stirred together until it held its shape. The mixture pressed into a greased loaf pan and smoothed on top. The pan slid into a moderate oven and baked for 4 to 5 minutes until the top turned golden brown and firm. Salmon loaf sliced thick and served hot with mashed potatoes and green beans or cold the next day in sandwiches. The loaf tasted mild, moist, and filled plates without costing much. The texture firm but tender. The flavor delicate and satisfying. Kids ate it without complaints. Adults appreciated how 1 can of salmon fed the whole family for 2 meals. Mothers made it on Fridays or whenever the grocery money ran low. No fancy ingredients, no written instructions, no fuss. Just salmon, eggs, and breadcrumbs turned into supper that stretched pennies and filled stomachs. Every farmhouse mother had her own version, but the result always tasted good and cost almost nothing. Chicken and rice fed farmhouse families across the South and Midwest from the 1920s through the 1960s. Chicken pieces, legs, thighs, breasts, browned in a heavy pot with a little oil or lard. The chicken lifted out and set aside. Onions and celery chopped and tossed into the same pot. The vegetables cooked in the chicken drippings until soft and fragrant. White rice poured in and stirred to coat every grain with flavor. Chicken broth or water added. Salt and pepper sprinkled over. A bay leaf dropped in. The browned chicken pieces nestled back into the rice. The pot covered tight and set on low heat. The rice simmered slowly and soaked up all the chicken flavor. The meat turned tender and fell off the bones. The rice cooked fluffy and rich. Chicken and rice served straight from the pot into bowls. The dish tasted savory, filling, and comforting. The rice creamy from the chicken drippings. The meat juicy and falling apart. The flavor simple but perfect. Kids ate big helpings without being told twice. Adults went back for more. Mothers made it on busy days because once the pot was covered, it cooked itself. No stirring, no watching, no babysitting the stove, just chicken, rice, and broth turned into supper that tasted like home. Every farm mother made it slightly different, but nobody ever needed a recipe because the steps lived in their hands and hearts. 15 farmhouse suppers that fed families through hard times and long workdays. Simple ingredients. No recipes. Just mothers who knew how to make something from almost nothing. 15 more suppers still waiting, dishes your grandma made without ever measuring a thing. Ground beef gravy over biscuits filled breakfast and supper tables across rural America from the 1930s through the 1960s. 1 pound of ground beef browned in a cast-iron skillet. The meat broken apart with a wooden spoon while it cooked. Onions chopped and stirred into the beef. Salt and pepper added. When the meat browned all the way through, flour sprinkled over and stirred in to coat everything. The flour cooked for a minute to get rid of the raw taste. Milk poured in slowly while stirring to prevent lumps. The gravy simmered and thickened into a rich, creamy sauce. More milk added if it got too thick. More flour if it stayed too thin. The gravy ladled over split buttermilk biscuits. Homemade if there was time, canned if there wasn't. Ground beef gravy over biscuits tasted rich, peppery, and stuck to your ribs. The gravy soaked into the soft biscuits, the beef chunky and flavorful, the pepper sharp and warming. Kids ate it before school, farmhands ate it after morning chores, adults ate it for supper when the day ran long and the budget ran short. Mothers made it in 20 minutes without a recipe because it was fast, cheap, and always satisfying. 1 pound of beef and a cup of flour fed 6 people. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted. Just meat, milk, and biscuits turned into comfort food that filled stomachs and stretched dollars. Tuna patties showed up on Catholic Friday tables and tight-budget suppers from the 1930s through the 1960s. 1 can of tuna drained and flaked into a bowl. Saltine crackers crushed fine and stirred in. 1 egg beaten and mixed through to hold everything together. Chopped onion added if there was one. A pinch of salt and pepper sprinkled in. Some mothers added a splash of lemon juice or a dab of mustard for extra flavor. The mixture shaped into flat patties with wet hands. A cast-iron skillet heated with a little oil or butter. The patties placed in the hot skillet and fried until golden brown and crispy on both sides. The outside turned crunchy and the inside stayed moist and tender. Tuna patties served hot with mashed potatoes and green beans or cold the next day in sandwiches. The patties tasted mild, crispy, and satisfying. The crust crunchy and salty. The inside soft and flaky. Kids ate them without fussing. Adults appreciated how 1 can of tuna made supper for 4 or 5 people. Mothers made them on Fridays when meat wasn't allowed or whenever the grocery money ran low. No written recipe. No fancy ingredients. No complicated steps. Just tuna, crackers, and an egg turned into patties that tasted good and cost almost nothing. Every farm mother made them a little different, but the result always filled plates and stretched pennies when times got tight. Chicken La King graced Sunday supper tables and church potlucks from the 1940s through the 1960s. Leftover chicken or a whole chicken poached and shredded. Butter melted in a saucepan, flour whisked in to make a smooth roux. Milk poured in slowly while stirring until smooth and thick. Cream added if there was any in the icebox. The white sauce simmered gently until it coated the back of a spoon. Shredded chicken stirred in. Canned or fresh mushrooms sliced and added. Green bell peppers diced and tossed in. Pimientos chopped and mixed through for color and a little sweetness. Salt and pepper added to taste. The whole mixture simmered until everything heated through and the flavors blended together. Chicken la king spooned over toast points, biscuits, or fluffy white rice. The dish tasted creamy, rich, and elegant even though it cost almost nothing to make. The sauce velvety and full of flavor. The chicken tender and moist. The peppers and pimientos bright and colorful. Kids ate it without complaints. Adults served it to company and felt proud. Mothers made it when they wanted to make leftovers look fancy or when the preacher came for supper. No recipe card needed. No complicated techniques. Just cream sauce, chicken, and a few vegetables turned into something that looked and tasted special. Every farm mother had her own version, but the result always impressed guests and family alike. Creamed tuna on toast fed farmhouse families quickly and cheaply from the 1930s through the 1960s. 1 can of tuna drained and flaked with a fork. Butter melted in a small saucepan over medium heat. Flour whisked in until smooth and bubbling. Milk poured in slowly while stirring constantly to make a thick white sauce. The sauce cooked gently until it coated the back of a spoon. The tuna stirred into the creamy sauce. Salt and pepper added to taste. A pinch of paprika, or a dash of Worcestershire sauce if there was any in the cupboard. Some mothers added a handful of frozen peas for color and extra vegetables. The creamed tuna simmered gently until everything heated through and the flavors melded together. Bread toasted until golden brown and crispy. The creamed tuna spooned generously over the hot toast. Creamed tuna on toast tasted creamy, comforting, and filled stomachs fast. The sauce rich and smooth, the tuna mild and flaky. The toast soaked up the cream and stayed a little crunchy on the edges. Kids ate it for lunch or supper without complaining. Adults made it when time and money ran short. Mothers made it in 10 minutes without a recipe because it required only pantry staples, canned tuna, flour, milk, bread. 1 can of tuna stretched into supper for 4 people. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. Nothing wasted. Just cream sauce, tuna, and toast turned into a meal that satisfied hungry families and cost almost nothing. Beef and vegetable soup simmered on farmhouse stoves across America from the 1920s through the 1960s. Beef soup bones, or a cheap cut of beef with bone, dropped into a big pot of water. Salt added. The pot brought to a boil, then turned down low to simmer for hours. The meat cooked until it fell off the bones. The bones fished out and thrown away. The meat shredded and returned to the pot. Potatoes peeled and diced. Carrots sliced thick. Celery chopped. Onions diced. Tomatoes from a jar or fresh if it was summer added. Green beans tossed in. Corn cut from the cob if there was any available. A bay leaf dropped in for flavor. All the vegetables dropped into the beef broth. The soup simmered for another hour until the vegetables turned tender and the broth rich with deep beefy flavor. Beef and vegetable soup ladled into bowls and served with thick slices of bread or warm cornbread on the side. The soup tasted hearty, wholesome, and filled bellies completely. The broth rich and beefy. The vegetables soft and flavorful. The meat tender and satisfying. Kids ate bowl after bowl without being told. Adults appreciated how 1 soup bone and a few vegetables made enough soup to feed the family for 2 full days. Mothers made it all winter long without a recipe, because it was simple, cheap, and always tasted good. Nothing wasted. Everything used. 20 farmhouse suppers down. 20 dishes Grandma made without ever opening a cookbook. Simple ingredients. Clear steps. Real food that fed real families through the hardest years. 10 more suppers waiting, meals that deserve to be remembered. Shipwreck casserole fed farmhouse families across the Midwest from the 1930s through the 1960s. The name came from the way everything got layered and shipwrecked together in one big pan. 1 pound of ground beef browned in a skillet with chopped onions, salt, and pepper added. The meat drained and set aside. A deep baking dish greased with butter or lard. Raw potatoes sliced thin and layered across the bottom of the dish. Salt and pepper sprinkled over the potatoes. The browned ground beef spread over the potatoes in an even layer. Raw rice scattered over the beef, about half a cup of uncooked white rice. Chopped celery layered on top of the rice, sliced carrots added next. Another layer of sliced onions if there were extra. A can of tomato soup poured over everything without stirring. Water added to the empty soup can and poured over the top to help the rice cook and the vegetables steam. The whole thing covered tight with aluminum foil or a lid. The casserole slid into a moderate oven and baked for 2 hours until the potatoes turned tender, the rice cooked through, and the beef absorbed all the tomato flavor. The foil lifted carefully to check if the rice was done. More water added if it looked too dry. The casserole baked uncovered for the last 10 minutes to brown the top slightly. Shipwreck casserole served hot straight from the baking dish. The dish tasted hearty, filling, and comforting. The potatoes soft and soaked with tomato flavor. The beef rich and savory. The rice tender and flavorful. The vegetables cooked just right. The tomato sauce thick and coating everything. Kids ate big helpings without complaints. Adults appreciated how 1 pound of meat, a handful of vegetables, and a little rice fed the whole family. Mothers made it on busy days because once it went into the oven, they could forget about it for 2 hours and do other work. No stirring, no checking, no babysitting. The casserole cooked itself. Every farm mother made it slightly different. Some added green beans, some used beef broth instead of water, some layered kidney beans or navy beans, but the method stayed the same. Layer everything raw in a pan, pour liquid over, cover tight, bake until done. No recipe needed, no measuring required. Just instinct and experience passed down from mother to daughter. Shipwreck casserole proved that you didn't need fancy ingredients or complicated steps to make supper that satisfied hungry families and stretched tight budgets. 1 pan, 1 oven, 1 simple meal that tasted like home. Chicken fricassee appeared on farmhouse tables across America from the 1920s through the 1950s. 1 whole chicken cut into pieces, legs, thighs, breasts, wings. The chicken pieces dusted lightly with flour, salt, and pepper. A heavy pot or deep skillet heated on the stove with a few spoonfuls of lard or butter. The chicken pieces placed in the hot fat and browned on all sides until golden. The chicken lifted out and set aside on a plate. Onions chopped and tossed into the same pot with the chicken drippings. Celery chopped and added. Carrots sliced and stirred in. The vegetables cooked until they started to soften and smell sweet. Flour sprinkled over the vegetables and stirred to coat everything. The flour cooked for a minute to get rid of the raw taste. Chicken broth or water poured in slowly while stirring to prevent lumps. The liquid brought to a simmer. The brown chicken pieces nestled back into the pot with all the vegetables and broth. A bay leaf dropped in. A sprig of fresh thyme if there was any in the garden. The pot covered and the heat turned down low. The chicken simmered gently for an hour until the meat fell off the bones and the broth thickened into rich gravy. The chicken pieces lifted carefully onto a platter. The gravy tasted and adjusted with more salt and pepper if needed. Some mothers stirred in a splash of cream or a beaten egg yolk to make the gravy even richer. The gravy poured over the chicken. Chicken fricassee served hot with mashed potatoes, biscuits, or rice on the side. The dish tasted rich, savory, and comforting. The chicken tender and juicy. the gravy thick and full of flavor, the vegetables soft and sweet. Kids ate every bite and soaked up the gravy with bread. Adults went back for seconds. Mothers made it on Sundays or when company came because it looked elegant and tasted special, even though it cost almost nothing. One chicken, a few vegetables, and some flour turned into a meal that impressed everyone at the table. No written recipe needed. No fancy techniques. Just patience and a slow simmer. Every farmhouse mother made her fricassee a little different. Some added mushrooms, some used white wine if they had it, some finished it with peas or pearl onions, but the method stayed the same. Brown the chicken. Cook the vegetables. Make gravy. Simmer everything together until tender. Simple steps that created something that tasted like love and hard work, and Sunday afternoons when the whole family gathered around the table and nobody left hungry. Salmon croquettes showed up on Friday tables and tight-budget suppers from the 1930s through the 1960s. One can of pink salmon drained and flaked into a mixing bowl. The bones mashed with a fork because calcium mattered and nothing went to waste. Breadcrumbs or crushed saltine crackers stirred in, about half a cup. One egg beaten and poured over. A little milk or the juice from the salmon can added to moisten the mixture. Chopped onion stirred in. Chopped celery added if there was any. A pinch of salt and pepper. Some mothers added a dash of hot sauce or a squeeze of lemon juice for extra flavor. The mixture stirred together until it held its shape when squeezed. The mixture shaped into flat round patties about the size of a biscuit. The patties placed on a plate and chilled in the icebox for 30 minutes to help them hold together. A cast iron skillet heated on the stove with oil or butter. The chilled patties placed carefully in the hot oil. The croquettes fried on one side until golden brown and crispy, about 4 minutes. The patties flipped gently with a spatula. The other side fried until golden and crispy. The finished croquettes lifted onto a plate, lined with a clean dish towel to drain the extra oil. Salmon croquettes served hot with mashed potatoes and green beans or coleslaw on the side. Some families ate them in sandwiches the next day. The croquettes tasted crispy on the outside and moist and flaky on the inside. The salmon flavor mild and satisfying. The crust crunchy and golden. The inside tender and full of flavor. Kids ate them without fussing. Adults appreciated how one can of salmon made supper for 4 or 5 people. Mothers made them on Fridays when meat wasn't allowed, or whenever the grocery budget ran low. Catholics made them every Friday during Lent. Farm families made them whenever fish was cheaper than beef. No written recipe required. No fancy ingredients. No complicated steps. Just salmon, crackers, and an egg turned into patties that filled plates and stretched pennies. Every farmhouse mother made them slightly different. Some rolled them in extra breadcrumbs before frying, some shaped them into balls instead of patties, some added a little mustard or pickle relish to the mixture. But the result always tasted good and cost almost nothing. One can of salmon that cost 35 cents in the 1950s fed an entire family. Nothing wasted. Everything used. Simple food that satisfied hungry people and proved that you didn't need expensive ingredients to make supper that tasted like home and filled stomachs completely. Chicken bog fed families across the Carolina Low Country from the 1920s through the 1960s. The name came from the way the rice got bogged down with chicken and sausage. One whole chicken simmered in a big pot of water with salt, pepper, celery, and onion, until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken lifted from the broth and shredded by hand while still hot. The broth strained to remove the vegetables and any bones. The clean broth measured, about 6 cups needed. The broth poured back into the pot and brought to a boil. Smoked sausage sliced thick and dropped into the boiling broth. Some families used country sausage. Some used kielbasa. Some used whatever smoked meat was available. Raw, long-grain white rice poured into the boiling broth, about 2 cups. The heat turned down to low. The pot covered tight. The rice simmered slowly for 20 minutes without lifting the lid. The shredded chicken stirred back in after the rice absorbed most of the liquid. Butter added, a big spoonful. Salt and pepper adjusted to taste. The whole pot stirred gently to mix everything together. The pot covered again and left to sit off the heat for 10 minutes so the flavors could meld and the rice could finish cooking. Chicken bog served straight from the pot into bowls. The dish tasted rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. The rice creamy and infused with chicken flavor. The sausage smoky and spicy. The chicken tender and falling apart. The butter making everything rich. Kids ate big helpings. Adults went back for seconds and thirds. Mothers made it for church suppers, family reunions, and weeknight dinners, because it fed a crowd without costing much. 1 chicken, 1 package of sausage, and 2 cups of rice fed 12 people. No fancy ingredients, no complicated steps, just chicken, sausage, rice, and broth cooked together until everything became one unified dish that tasted like the Carolina coast. Chicken gravy over rice fed farmhouse families across the South from the 1920s through the 1960s. Chicken pieces, legs, thighs, breasts, dusted with flour, salt, and pepper. A heavy skillet heated on the stove with a few spoonfuls of oil or lard. The floured chicken pieces placed in the hot oil and fried until golden brown and crispy on all sides. The chicken lifted out and set aside on a plate. Most of the oil poured off, but a few spoonfuls left in the pan with all the browned bits stuck to the bottom. Flour sprinkled into the hot oil, about 3 tablespoons. The flour stirred and cooked until it turned golden brown and smelled nutty. Water or chicken broth poured in slowly while stirring and scraping up all the browned bits from the bottom of the pan. The liquid stirred constantly to prevent lumps. More liquid added until the gravy reached the right consistency, thick enough to coat the back of a spoon but thin enough to pour. Salt and pepper added to taste. The fried chicken pieces nestled back into the gravy. The skillet covered and the heat turned down low. The chicken simmered gently in the gravy for 30 minutes until the meat turned tender and the gravy absorbed all the chicken flavor. The gravy checked halfway through and more water added if it got too thick. White rice cooked in a separate pot. Long grain rice rinsed and cooked in salted water until fluffy and tender. The rice drained and fluffed with a fork. Chicken gravy over rice, served by spooning rice onto plates and topping it with chicken pieces and plenty of gravy. The dish tasted rich, savory, and deeply comforting. The gravy thick and full of chicken flavor. The rice fluffy and soaking up the gravy. The chicken tender and falling off the bone. The crispy coating on the chicken softened in the gravy but added texture and flavor. Kids ate until their plates were clean. Adults went back for more rice and gravy. Mothers made it on busy weeknights because once the chicken went into the gravy, it cooked itself while they did other work. 25 farmhouse suppers that fed families through the hardest years. No recipes written down, no fancy ingredients, just mothers who turned simple staples into meals that satisfied. 5 more suppers coming. Dishes that proved love didn't need a cookbook. Beef and potato hash turned Sunday leftovers into Monday supper across America from the 1920s through the 1960s. Leftover pot roast or beef roast chopped into small pieces. Leftover boiled or baked potatoes diced into cubes. Onions chopped fine. A big cast-iron skillet heated on the stove with a generous spoonful of bacon grease, lard, or butter. The chopped onions tossed into the hot fat first and cooked until soft and starting to brown. The diced potatoes added next and spread out in an even layer. The potatoes left alone for a few minutes to form a crispy golden crust on the bottom. The potatoes stirred and flipped to brown the other sides. The chopped beef stirred in, salt and pepper sprinkled generously over everything. Some mothers added a dash of Worcestershire sauce or a pinch of garlic powder for extra flavor. The whole mixture pressed down flat in the skillet with a spatula and left alone again to form another crispy crust. The hash cooked slowly over medium heat until the bottom turned golden brown and crispy. About 10 minutes. A spatula slipped under, and the hash flipped in sections or broken apart and stirred to mix the crispy bits throughout. The hash cooked a few more minutes until heated through completely. Beef and potato hash served hot on plates with fried eggs on top, or a side of toast. Some families ate it for breakfast. Some ate it for supper. The hash tasted savory, crispy, and deeply satisfying. The potatoes crunchy on the outside and creamy inside. The beef rich and flavorful. The onions sweet and caramelized. The crispy brown crust the best part, crunchy and full of concentrated flavor. Kids ate it without complaints. Adults appreciated how Sunday's leftovers became something even better on Monday. Mothers made it without measuring or following written instructions because the method was simple and flexible. Any leftover meat worked. Beef, pork, chicken, even ham. Simple ingredients turned into something that made Monday feel less like leftovers and more like a whole new meal. Nothing wasted. Everything used. Good food that filled hungry bellies and proved that simple cooking done right beat fancy recipes every time. Chicken and slicks fed Appalachian and Southern farmhouse families from the 1920s through the 1960s. Slicks were flat-wide noodles rolled thin and cut into rough rectangles. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect. One whole chicken simmered in a big pot of water with salt, pepper, celery, onion, and maybe a bay leaf until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken lifted from the broth and shredded by hand. The broth strained to remove bones and vegetables. The clean broth brought back to a rolling boil. Flour, salt, and a little lard or butter mixed in a bowl. Cold water or milk added slowly and stirred until a stiff dough formed. The dough rolled out thin on a floured surface, about as thin as pie crust. The rolled dough cut into rough rectangles about 2 inches by 4 inches. The shapes didn't need to be perfect. The slicks dropped one by one into the boiling broth. The slicks cooked for 20 to 30 minutes until tender, and the broth thickened into a rich gravy from the flour in the dough. The shredded chicken stirred back into the pot. The whole mixture simmered gently for another 10 minutes, so the flavors melded together. Chicken and slicks ladled into deep bowls and served with cornbread on the side. The dish tasted rich, comforting, and deeply satisfying. The slicks tender and doughy, thicker and chewier than regular noodles. The broth thick and coating everything. The chicken flavorful and tender. Kids ate bowls full. Adults went back for seconds. Mothers made it on cold days when the family needed something warm and filling. The slicks were different from dumplings, flatter, chewier, more substantial, different from noodles, thicker, rougher, more rustic. Chicken and biscuit pie appeared on farmhouse tables across America from the 1930s through the 1960s. One whole chicken simmered in water with salt, pepper, celery, and onion until tender. The chicken lifted from the broth and shredded. The broth strained and set aside. Butter melted in a large saucepan. Flour whisked in to make a roux. Chicken broth poured in slowly while stirring to make a thick gravy. Milk or cream added to make the gravy richer. Chopped carrots added. Peas stirred in, fresh or frozen. Chopped celery and onions added if they weren't already in the broth. The shredded chicken stirred into the gravy with all the vegetables. Salt and pepper adjusted to taste. Some mothers added a pinch of sage or thyme for extra flavor. The chicken mixture poured into a greased baking dish, usually a deep casserole or cast-iron skillet. Biscuit dough mixed quickly in a bowl, flour, baking powder, salt, butter, and milk stirred just until combined. Some mothers used leftover biscuit dough from breakfast. Some used canned biscuits to save time. The biscuit dough dropped by spoonfuls on top of the hot chicken mixture. The biscuits didn't need to cover everything completely. Gaps were fine because the biscuits would puff up and spread while baking. The dish slid into a hot oven and baked for 25 to 30 minutes until the biscuits turned golden brown and cooked through, and the chicken mixture bubbled around the edges. Chicken and biscuit pie served hot straight from the baking dish. The dish tasted rich, comforting, and satisfying. The chicken gravy thick and flavorful. The vegetables tender. The biscuits fluffy and golden. The bottom of each biscuit soaked up the gravy while the top stayed light and flaky. Kids ate the biscuits first, then the chicken. Adults ate everything together and soaked up every drop of gravy. Mothers made it when they had leftover chicken or when they wanted to stretch one chicken into supper for the whole family. The biscuit topping made it feel like a special meal even though it cost almost nothing and used mostly pantry staples. No written recipe needed. No precise measurements. Every farmhouse mother made her version a little different. Some added mushrooms, some used cream of chicken soup instead of making gravy from scratch, some topped it with pie crust instead of biscuits. But the result always tasted like home. One dish. One oven. Simple ingredients transformed into something that brought the family to the table and left everyone satisfied. The kind of food that reminded you that the best meals didn't need fancy ingredients or complicated techniques, just good chicken, a handful of vegetables, and biscuits that soaked up all the love baked into every bite. Brunswick stew fed families across Virginia, Georgia, and the Carolinas from the 1920s through the 1960s. The origins disputed. Virginia claimed it, Georgia claimed it, North Carolina claimed it, but every family ate it, and every mother made it without a recipe. One whole chicken simmered in a big pot of water until the meat fell off the bones. The chicken lifted out and shredded. The broth kept boiling. Pork added. Usually a pork shoulder or ham hock simmered in the same broth until tender. The pork removed and shredded. Some families used squirrel or rabbit instead of pork in the early days. Potatoes peeled and diced. Onions chopped. The potatoes and onions dropped into the boiling broth. Corn cut from the cob, fresh in summer, canned in winter. Lima beans or butter beans added. Tomatoes chopped and stirred in, fresh in summer, canned the rest of the year. Okra sliced and added if it was available. The shredded chicken and pork stirred back into the pot. The whole mixture simmered slowly for hours until the vegetables broke down and the stew thickened into something between a soup and a hash. Salt and pepper added. Some mothers added a splash of vinegar or a spoonful of sugar to balance the tomatoes. Some added hot sauce or red pepper flakes. The stew stirred occasionally to keep it from sticking. More broth or water added if it got too thick. Brunswick stew served in bowls with cornbread on the side. The stew tasted rich, complex, and deeply satisfying. The chicken and pork tender and falling apart. The vegetables soft and melting together. The broth thick and coating every spoonful. The flavors all blended into something that tasted like summer and hard work and tradition. Kids ate bowls full. Adults went back for seconds. Mothers made it for church suppers, family reunions, and political rallies because it fed a crowd and tasted better the next day. One pot of Brunswick stew could feed 30 people. The ingredients were flexible. Whatever meat was available, whatever vegetables were in season. No two pots tasted exactly the same, but every pot tasted good. Every Southern mother made her Brunswick stew a little different. Some made it thick like hash, some kept it thinner like soup, some used all chicken, some used all pork, some added beef. But the method stayed the same. Simmer meat until tender. Add vegetable. Cook low and slow until everything breaks down. Stir often. Serve hot. No written recipe, because the proportions lived in every mother's memory and changed based on what was available. Simple ingredients cooked with patience created something that connected families to their history and their community and reminded everyone that the best food came from a pot that simmered all day and filled the house with the smell of home. Country Captain showed up on Southern tables from the 1930s through the 1960s. The name mysterious, some said it came from a British sea captain, some said it came from India, some said it was just a fancy name for chicken and rice with curry. One whole chicken cut into pieces. The chicken dusted with flour, salt, and pepper. A heavy pot or deep skillet heated with oil or butter. The chicken pieces browned on all sides until golden. The chicken lifted out and set aside. Onions chopped and tossed into the same pot with the chicken drippings. Bell peppers diced and added, green peppers usually, sometimes red, garlic minced and stirred in. The vegetables cooked until soft. Curry powder added, about 2 tablespoons. The curry stirred into the vegetables and cooked for a minute until fragrant. Canned tomatoes poured in, crushed or diced. Raisins or currants added, about half a cup. Some mothers used dried apricots chopped small. The mixture stirred together. The browned chicken pieces nestled back into the pot with all the sauce. The pot covered and the heat turned down low. The chicken simmered gently for 45 minutes until tender, and the sauce thickened. White rice cooked separately. Long grain rice steamed until fluffy. Almonds toasted in a dry skillet until golden and fragrant. Country Captain served by spooning rice onto plates, topping with chicken and sauce, and sprinkling toasted almonds over the top. The dish tasted exotic, sweet, savory, and complex. The curry warm and aromatic, but not too spicy. The raisins sweet and plump. The tomatoes rich and tangy, the almonds crunchy and adding texture, the chicken tender and soaking up all the flavors. Kids ate it even though it looked different from regular chicken. Adults served it to company because it felt special and worldly. Mothers made it when they wanted to impress guests or try something a little fancy without spending much money. One chicken, a can of tomatoes, a handful of raisins, and a spoonful of curry powder created something that tasted like it came from a restaurant. No written recipe needed. Every Southern mother who made Country Captain learned it from a neighbor or a church cookbook or a magazine clipping tucked into a drawer. The recipe passed from kitchen to kitchen and changed slightly with each telling. Some made it spicier. Some added more raisins. Some used chicken broth instead of tomatoes, but the combination of chicken, curry, raisins, and almonds stayed the same. One pot. One stove. Simple ingredients combined in an unexpected way that created something memorable. The kind of dish that reminded you that farmhouse cooking wasn't always plain. Sometimes it borrowed flavors from far away and made them fit perfectly on a Southern supper table.